Before we begin, if you're enjoying these stories from the restricted zones that park rangers aren't supposed to talk about, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It really helps us bring you more of these accounts that the Park Service would prefer stayed buried. And I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's get into what I found beneath Mammoth Cave. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and I've been a park ranger at Mammoth Cave National Park for 15 years. Before that, I spent 5 years as a professional caver, exploring unmapped systems across 3 continents. I've been deeper underground than most people will ever go. I've crawled through passages so tight I had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. I've rappelled down pits so deep my headlamp couldn't find the bottom. I'm telling you this so you understand that I'm not someone who scares easily. I know caves. I respect them, certainly, but I don't fear them. At least, I didn't. Not until I found the sealed passage and learned what the Park Service has been hiding 400 feet below Kentucky for over 100 years. Mammoth Cave is the world's longest-known cave system with more than 420 mapped miles of passages. Tourist routes cover maybe 5 miles of that. The rest is a labyrinth of passages that wind through the limestone like veins through marble. Some so vast you could fit a cathedral inside them. Others so narrow you have to wonder how the explorers who first mapped them didn't simply give up and turn back. I've always loved the history of these caves. The mining operations from the 1800s, the tuberculosis hospital they briefly tried to run down here in 1842, the Native American artifacts found in the deepest passages. Every tunnel tells a story if you know how to read it, but there was one story I didn't know. One, the Park Service had been very careful to keep quiet. It started on a Tuesday in March, 3 months ago. I was assigned routine maintenance duty, which basically means checking seals on closed passages, testing air quality, and making sure the tourist routes are still stable. It's boring work, but necessary. Caves are dynamic systems, always changing, always moving. What's safe today might be deadly tomorrow. I was working alone in a section called the Historic Route, one of the older tourist areas that's been closed for renovations. The passage I was checking, officially designated as H47, had been sealed in 2003. According to the maintenance logs, it was closed due to unstable geology and the discovery of a rare bat species that needed protection. Standard stuff. We have dozens of sealed passages throughout the cave system. The seal itself was a reinforced metal gate with a concrete foundation, installed professionally and marked with the usual warnings. Authorized personnel only. Danger. No entry. The kind of thing you see all over restricted cave systems. Except this gate was different. As I approached it with my headlamp, I immediately noticed something wrong. The lock was broken. Not picked, not cut, broken from the inside. The heavy padlock that should have been securing the gate hung uselessly, its shackle bent outward like something had pushed against it with tremendous force. My first thought was vandals, though how anyone could have gotten past the gate to break it from the inside made no sense. I radioed it in to the ranger station. "Station, this is Rodriguez. I've got a code 7 at H47. Gate seal is compromised." There was a long pause before the dispatcher, Tommy Chen, responded. Tommy had been working the desk for 20 years and nothing ever rattled him. But I could hear something in his voice when he answered. "Elena, can you repeat that?" "Which gate?" "H47. Historic route, about a quarter mile past the junction with Gothic Avenue. The seal is broken. Looks like it was forced from inside the passage." Another pause, longer this time. "Stand by." "Don't enter the passage. Supervisor wants to talk to you." That was odd. A broken gate seal should warrant investigation, sure, but not immediate supervisor involvement. I stood there in the darkness, my headlamp casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was about to radio again when my handheld crackled to life, but it wasn't Tommy's voice. "Ranger Rodriguez, this is Director Vaughn. I need you to secure the area and wait for a team to arrive. Do not, under any circumstances, enter H-47. Director Vaughn, the director of the entire park, personally calling me on a maintenance run. In 15 years, I'd spoken to her maybe 3 times, always at official functions. Copy that, Director. Should I document the damage? Negative. Just secure the area and wait." The radio went silent. I stood there, staring at the broken gate, my mind racing. What was so important about this particular sealed passage that the director herself would get involved? And why was I being told not to document standard maintenance issues? I should have followed orders. I should have backed away from the gate, secured the area, and waited for whatever team was being sent. But 15 years as a ranger and 5 years before that as a professional caver had taught me that caves don't wait for anyone. Whatever had broken that seal from the inside could be in danger, could be injured, could need immediate help. I made a decision that would change everything. I pushed the gate open. It swung inward with a rusty groan, and I stepped into H-47. The air hit me first. It was wrong. Cave air has a particular quality, cool and still and slightly damp. This air was cold, far colder than it should have been, and it had a strange quality to it, almost crystalline, like breathing in winter morning fog. My breath came out in visible puffs, which shouldn't have been possible at this depth where temperatures stay constant year-round. The passage itself looked normal at first. Standard limestone walls, some flowstone formations, the usual cave features. My headlamp beam stretched about 30 feet before the passage curved out of sight. I moved forward slowly, checking my equipment. My radio was getting interference, nothing but static. Not unusual in deep cave systems, but we were supposed to have repeaters throughout this section. I'd gone maybe 50 feet when I noticed the first anomaly. On the left wall, about chest height, was a mark. Not a natural formation, not graffiti. It was carved into the stone with precision, a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked almost like a mathematical formula or perhaps a very stylized letter from an alphabet I'd never seen. The carving was deep, at least a quarter inch into the solid limestone, and the edges were sharp, recent. Limestone erodes over time, especially in cave environments. This had been made recently, very recently. I photographed it with my helmet camera and continued forward. The passage was descending now, sloping gently downward, standard for this area. But the walls were changing. The natural roughness of limestone was giving way to something smoother, more regular. At first, I thought it might be flowstone, the calcite deposits that form when mineral-rich water flows over rock for thousands of years. But flowstone has a characteristic lumpy organic quality. These walls were flat, precisely flat. I ran my hand along the surface. It was cold, far colder than any stone I'd ever touched underground, and perfectly smooth. No tool marks, no indication of how it had been shaped. It was as if someone had taken a natural cave passage and polished every surface to geometric perfection. More symbols appeared as I went deeper. They weren't random, they followed a pattern, appearing at regular intervals along both walls. Each one was different but similar, like words in a sentence written in an unknown language. I documented every one with my camera, knowing that whatever scientific team eventually studied this would need thorough documentation. The passage opened into a small chamber, maybe 20 feet across. Here, the transformation from natural cave to something else was complete. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all smooth, joined at angles that were precisely 90 degrees. This wasn't natural. This couldn't be natural. Someone had carved this chamber out of solid limestone with tools that left no marks, creating corners and edges that would have made a master stonemason weep with envy. In the center of the chamber was a hole, circular, about 3 feet in diameter, descending straight down. The edges were perfect, smooth as glass. I approached carefully and shone my light down. The beam seemed to go on forever, reflecting off walls that were just as smooth as those around me. I couldn't see the bottom. I checked my gear. I had about 200 feet of rope, standard for this kind of work. I could rig a simple rappel, go down, take a look, and be back up in 20 minutes. The team Vaughn was sending wouldn't arrive for at least another hour, probably longer, given that they'd have to gear up and navigate the tourist routes to get here. I should have waited. Every protocol, every bit of training, every ounce of common sense said to wait for backup. But I could hear something from down below, a sound, faint but distinct, rhythmic, regular, like someone tapping on stone with a hammer. Someone could be trapped down there. Someone who had broken the seal from the inside, trying to get out. Someone who needed help. I secured my rope to a stable formation, tested it twice, and began my descent. The walls of the shaft were the same impossible smooth stone. My rope whispered against them as I rappelled down, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. 20 feet. 40 feet, 60. The temperature continued to drop. At 80 feet, I could see my breath as white clouds. At 100 feet, I noticed something that made my hands shake on the rope. The walls weren't just smooth. They had a pattern carved into them, spiraling down the shaft like a thread on a screw. Not the same symbols from above, but something else, continuous, flowing, almost organic, despite its geometric precision. It was like descending into a rifle barrel that had been carved by an artist obsessed with mathematical beauty. At 120 feet, my feet touched solid ground. I unclipped from the rope and looked around. I was standing in a corridor. Not a cave passage, not a natural formation. A corridor. The walls extended straight ahead, perfectly parallel, for as far as my light could reach. The floor was level, the ceiling was exactly 8 feet high, and every surface had that same impossible smoothness. The spiral pattern from the shaft continued here, running along the walls like a guide rail, and everywhere, carved deep into that smooth stone, were symbols. Thousands of them, covering every surface, overlapping, intertwining, creating patterns within patterns. They hurt to look at directly, like they were trying to form meaning just beyond my comprehension. The tapping sound was louder here. It came from ahead, regular as a metronome. Tap, 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 4 seconds apart, never varying. I checked my equipment. My radio was completely dead now. My GPS showed no signal. My compass was spinning lazily, unable to find magnetic north. I was alone, 120 feet below the sealed passage, in a corridor that shouldn't exist, following a sound that might be someone in need of rescue. I started walking. The corridor ran straight for what felt like a quarter mile, though distance is hard to judge underground when everything looks the same. The symbols changed as I walked, evolving from the complex overlapping patterns near the shaft to simpler, more sparse markings. It was like watching language devolve, or perhaps evolve, from chaos to order. The tapping grew louder. I was getting close. The corridor opened into another chamber, this one much larger. My headlamp couldn't find the far walls or the ceiling. It was like stepping into a vast darkness, with only the smooth floor visible beneath my feet. The tapping echoed in the space, coming from somewhere ahead and to my left. I swept my light across the darkness and froze. There were structures in this chamber, geometric shapes rising from the floor, some as small as chairs, others the size of buildings. They had the same smooth quality as everything else, but they were more complex, more deliberate. They looked like buildings, but buildings designed by someone who had never seen human architecture, who was working from pure mathematical principles rather than any practical consideration. And on every surface, those symbols. Tens of thousands of them, maybe millions, carved with the same precision as everything else. The chamber was a library, or a monument, or a message, written in a language that predated human language, carved by tools that predated human tools. The tapping stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing. I stood perfectly still, my light aimed ahead, waiting. Then I heard something else, a sound like stone grinding against stone. Movement. Something was in the chamber with me, and it was moving. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vast darkness. "I'm a park ranger. If you need help." The grinding sound came again, closer now. I swept my light toward it and caught a glimpse of something moving between the structures. Something large. Something that moved wrong, with a gait that wasn't quite walking, wasn't quite crawling. My training kicked in. I backed toward the corridor, keeping my light aimed ahead, my free hand on my radio even though I knew it was useless. The movement stopped. Whatever was out there had frozen, perhaps responding to my light. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, methodically, the tapping resumed. Same rhythm, same interval, tap, tap, tap. But now I could see where it was coming from. One of the structures, a pillar maybe 30 feet tall, was being carved. I could see fresh stone dust falling from it. Could see a new symbol taking shape. But there was nothing there doing the carving. No person, no tool, no machine. The stone was simply changing, reforming itself according to some plan I couldn't perceive. One careful tap at a time. I ran. I made it back to the corridor, back to the shaft, back to my rope in what felt like seconds but must have been minutes. My hands shook as I clipped into my ascender and started climbing. The rope seemed to stretch forever. The spiral patterns on the wall blurred past as I hauled myself up with frantic desperation. When I finally emerged into the small chamber, I unclipped, gathered my gear with shaking hands, and headed back toward the entrance. The smooth walls gave way to the symbols, which gave way to natural limestone. The cold air warmed. The oppressive silence gave way to the normal cave sounds, water dripping, air moving. I reached the gate and found myself facing Director Vaughn and a team of 6 rangers in full cave rescue gear. They were setting up equipment, preparing to come after me. Vaughn's expression was hard to read, angry, certainly, but there was something else there. Concern? Fear? "Rodriguez," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I gave you explicit orders not to enter this passage." "There was someone down there," I said. "I heard there was no one down there," she interrupted. "There's never been anyone down there." "But the tapping, the structures. Ranger Rodriguez, you need to come with me, now. We need to debrief, and then you need to sign some paperwork." She turned to the team. "Seal it. Double reinforcement. And someone get me the maintenance logs for every gate in the system. I want to know if any others have been compromised." As they led me away from H-47, I looked back once. In the darkness beyond the gate, just for a moment, I thought I saw a light. Not a headlamp or a flashlight. A cold, blue-white glow that seemed to come from the stone itself, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Then the gate swung closed, and the darkness swallowed it. They took me to a conference room I'd never seen before, deep in the administrative building. No windows. Concrete walls. A single table with 2 chairs. Vaughn sat across from me, a folder in front of her. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "What you saw down there," she began, "you can't tell anyone. Not your family, not your friends, not your fellow rangers. This falls under federal security protocols that supersede your employment contract. What was that place? I asked. Those structures, the symbols, have been there longer than this country, Vaughn said. Longer than recorded history. We've been aware of them since the cave system was first seriously explored in the 1920s. A team from the Smithsonian documented what they could, classified it all, and the government has been monitoring it ever since. Monitoring what? What's down there? Vaughn opened the folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, showing the corridor, the chamber, the structures. They were old, black and white, but they showed the same things I'd just seen. There were also drawings, detailed technical sketches of the symbols, attempts to decode their meaning. We don't know what they are, Vaughn admitted. We don't know who made them or when or why. What we do know is that they're still active. The structures are still being built. The symbols are still being carved. And whatever's doing it has been at work for at least 100 years, probably much longer. The thing I saw moving, we call them the priors, Vaughn said. Because they were here before us. Before humanity, probably. Before mammals, maybe. We've never gotten a clear look at one. They avoid light, avoid human contact. But they're there, and they're working on something. She pulled out another photograph, this one more recent, in color. It showed the same chamber I'd just left, but from a different angle. And in the foreground, barely visible in the darkness, was a shape. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong. The proportions were off, the limbs too long, the body too narrow. It was turned away from the camera, facing one of the structures, and it seemed to be working on something. This was taken in 1997, Vaughn said. The only clear photograph we have. The team that took it was never the same afterward. 2 of them retired within a month. The third transferred to Alaska and refuses to discuss what they saw. Why are you telling me this? Because you've seen it now. You're part of it. And I need you to understand the importance of keeping this quiet. She pulled out a document, official-looking, covered in legal text and government seals. This is a non-disclosure agreement. It's enforceable under federal law. You sign it, you never speak about what you saw, and your career continues. You refuse, and you're immediately terminated, escorted off park property. And any attempt to share information about the sealed sections results in federal prosecution. I stared at the document. And if I sign? What then? Then you go back to your normal duties. You stay away from the sealed passages. You live your life. And in about 6 months, if you've proven you can keep quiet, I might call you back here and tell you the rest of it. The rest? Vaughn's expression darkened. The structures you saw are centuries old, but they're growing. The passages are extending, the priors are building toward something, and our seismologists estimate that in approximately 18 months, whatever they're building is going to reach the surface. She slid the document across the table toward me, along with a pen. So the question, Ranger Rodriguez, is whether you want to know the whole truth when that happens, or whether you'd prefer to be surprised along with everyone else. I picked up the pen. My hand was still shaking from the rappel, from the run, from the sight of that impossible chamber and its impossible architects. I thought about walking away, about going back to a normal life where caves were just caves and the deepest mystery was which passages bats preferred for hibernation. But I knew I couldn't. I'd seen too much, known too much. Whatever was being built beneath Mammoth Cave, whatever the priors were working toward, I needed to understand it. I signed the document. Vaughn took it, checked my signature, and filed it in her folder. Good. Go home, Rodriguez. Take tomorrow off. We'll talk again when you're ready. I left the conference room, left the administrative building, left the park, The sun was setting when I reached my car, painting the Kentucky hills in orange and gold. Everything looked normal, peaceful, mundane, but I knew the truth now. Beneath my feet, beneath these hills, beneath the longest cave system in the world, something ancient was still at work, and it was building toward something. I drove home, poured myself a drink I didn't usually take, and sat on my porch watching the stars come out. Somewhere below, in the dark and the cold and the silence, the tapping continued, regular, methodical, patient, tap, tap, tap. Building something humanity wasn't ready to see. Not yet. But soon. 6 months passed before Director Vaughn called me back to that windowless conference room. 6 months of normal ranger duties, of leading tourists through well-lit passages, of filing reports about bat populations and water quality. 6 months of pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen, hadn't learned what I'd learned. But every night, lying in bed, I heard it. That rhythmic tapping, so faint it might have been my imagination. Tap, 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 the sound of something ancient and patient, building toward a purpose I couldn't comprehend. I'd done my own research during those months carefully, quietly. The Park Service library had boxes of old expedition reports, most of them digitized now, but some still only available on yellowed paper in dusty archives. I found references to the sealed sections, always vague, always incomplete. A 1923 report mentioned architectural anomalies inconsistent with natural cave formation. A 1947 document described ongoing construction of unknown origin. A 1965 memo recommended continued isolation and observation of the lower development. Lower development. They'd been calling it that for decades, like it was a construction project some forgotten contractor had started and never finished. I also found the gaps. Entire years missing from the historical record. 1952 to 1954, completely absent. 1978 to 1981, nothing but blank pages where reports should have been. It was systematic, deliberate. Someone had removed evidence, hidden the full scope of what was happening beneath Mammoth Cave. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Vaughn's assistant, a stern woman named Patricia who never smiled, told me to report to the conference room at 2 p.m. No explanation, no context, just an order. When I arrived, Vaughn wasn't alone. There were 3 others in the room, all wearing the kind of dark suits that screamed federal government. They introduced themselves with names I immediately forgot and credentials that mentioned agencies I'd never heard of. Ranger Rodriguez, Vaughn began, you've kept your word. No breaches of the NDA, no attempts to access restricted areas, no concerning behavior, we appreciate that. I have questions, I said. One of the suits smiled without warmth. We assumed you would. That's why we're here, to provide context, and to recruit you. Recruit me for what? The lower development has accelerated, Vaughn said, pulling up images on a laptop. They showed seismograph readings, complex charts I couldn't fully interpret. The construction rate has increased by 40% in the last 6 months. Whatever they're building, they're approaching completion. She pulled up another image. This one, a 3D map of the cave system. The normal mapped passages were shown in blue. But beneath them, in red, was another network of passages much larger, much more extensive. They formed a pattern, geometric and precise, like a circuit board or a blueprint. This is what we've been able to map using ground-penetrating radar and seismic monitoring, one of the suits explained. The Pryor's construction extends under approximately 50 square miles. It's all connected, all following a mathematical pattern we haven't been able to decode. And it's all converging here, He pointed to a spot on the map, directly beneath the visitor center. "They're building toward the surface," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Correct. And based on current rates of progress, they'll break through in approximately 12 months, maybe less if they accelerate further. What happens when they do?" The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Vaughn spoke. "We don't know. That's why we need you. We need someone who understands caves, who can navigate the passages, who's already seen the priors and didn't break. We need detailed documentation of what they're building. We need to understand their purpose before they complete it." "You want me to go back down there?" "We want you to map it," the suit corrected. "Document everything. The symbols, the structures, the pattern. We have linguists, archaeologists, engineers standing by to analyze whatever you find. But we can't send a large team. The priors avoid groups. They only appear when individuals are alone. We need someone who can work independently, who can handle the psychological pressure." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all showing different parts of the lower development. Some were recent, digital, in color. Others were decades old, grainy, black and white, all showed the same impossible architecture, the same smooth stone, the same incomprehensible symbols. "You won't be the first," Vaughn said quietly. "We've sent 19 rangers down there over the years. 16 came back. Of those, 12 provided useful documentation. The other 4, the experience changed them, broke something fundamental in how they perceived reality. And the 3 who didn't come back?" No one answered that question. "You can refuse," Vaughn said. "No consequences, no judgment. You go back to normal duties and someone else takes the assignment. But Elena, you've seen them. You've been in the lower development and come back functional. That makes you rare. Valuable." I looked at the photographs spread across the table. The impossible chambers, the precise angles, the symbols that hurt to look at. I thought about the thing I'd glimpsed moving in the darkness, the prior with its wrong proportions and alien gait. I should have said no, should have walked away, transferred to a different park, forgotten about the tapping and the cold and the blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "When do I start?" I asked. They gave me a week to prepare. Specialized equipment, some of it I recognized, some I'd never seen before. A helmet camera with enhanced low-light capability. A suit lined with sensors that would track temperature, air composition, radiation levels, and electromagnetic fields. A tablet computer loaded with scanning software that could create 3D models of whatever I documented. And a device they called a resonance detector, which looked like a modified Geiger counter but supposedly detected something else entirely, something they couldn't or wouldn't explain. They also gave me files, thick binders full of reports from previous expeditions. I read them all, absorbing every detail. The first documented entry into the lower development was in 1924. A team of 3 geologists from the Smithsonian had been surveying the cave system when they found an unsealed passage. They descended, documented what they could, and emerged 3 days later, claiming they'd found evidence of a pre-Columbian civilization of extraordinary advancement. Their report had been immediately classified, and all 3 had been discredited publicly, their careers destroyed. Subsequent expeditions had been more controlled, more secretive. Government teams, usually alone or in pairs, venturing into the passages and returning with documentation. The reports were consistent. Smooth stone walls, mathematical symbols, structures that served no discernible purpose, and occasional glimpses of the priors, always retreating from light, always working, always building. One report from 1967 stood out. A ranger named Thomas Blackwood had spent 6 days in the lower development, mapping extensively. His documentation was meticulous, his observations precise, but his final entry was disturbing. They know we're watching. They've changed their pattern, incorporating new symbols that seem designed to communicate, or perhaps to warn. I can't shake the feeling that we're not studying them. They're studying us. Blackwood had refused all subsequent assignments to the lower development. He'd retired in 1970 and died in 1995. His final report remained classified. On the day of my descent, they sealed off an entire section of the cave, citing geological survey work. No tourists, no staff, just me and a support team that would wait at the surface monitoring my vitals and my camera feed. I stood at the gate to H-47, now reinforced with additional steel in 3 separate locks. Vaughn was there, along with the suits and a technical team monitoring an array of equipment I didn't understand. "You have 48 hours, Vaughn said. "Document everything you can, but if you feel unsafe, get out. We can always send someone else later. And if I see them, the priors. Observe, record, don't approach, don't interfere. They haven't shown hostility in any documented encounter, but that doesn't mean they're friendly. They're just indifferent, like we're beneath their notice." One of the suits handed me a small device, like a panic button. "Extreme emergency only." This sends a signal that should reach us even through the interference. We'll mount a rescue, but it'll take time, hours, maybe longer. I clipped it to my belt, tested my equipment one final time, and nodded. They opened the gate. The passage was exactly as I remembered it. The cold air, the smooth walls, the symbols at regular intervals. But I was prepared this time, methodical. I photographed every symbol, scanned every surface, documented the transition from natural cave to impossible architecture. The shaft down was easier with proper equipment. I'd brought a mechanical descender instead of relying on rappelling technique, and the 120-foot descent took only a few minutes. At the bottom, I activated the resonance detector. It immediately began clicking, like a Geiger counter near a radiation source. The frequency increased as I moved deeper into the corridor toward the chamber. Whatever it was detecting, there was more of it ahead. I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I noticed the first major change. The symbols on the walls were different. Not the same ones I'd seen 6 months ago. These were new, freshly carved, and they formed patterns that seemed almost recognizable, like they were evolving toward something I might understand. I documented them carefully, the tablet creating detailed 3D scans. The software was impressive, rendering the symbols in high resolution, noting their depth, their spacing, their relationship to each other. Later analysis might find the pattern I couldn't see. The corridor branched. I hadn't noticed this during my first panicked visit, but there were other passages leading off from the main road. I took the rightmost branch, marking my path with glow sticks that I placed every 50 feet. The branch descended, the angle steep enough that I had to brace myself against the walls. This passage was narrower, barely 6 feet wide, and the ceiling had dropped to just above my head. But it had the same impossible smoothness, the same perfect angles. And the walls here were covered in fresh stone dust, recent carving, probably within the last few days. The resonance detector's clicking became a steady buzz. I was approaching something active, something currently under construction. The passage opened into a small chamber, maybe 20 feet across, and I stopped in amazement. The walls were covered in what I could only describe as equations. Not the symbols from the corridors, but actual mathematical notation, using conventions I recognized but couldn't interpret. Integrals, differentials, symbols from theoretical physics and topology, and between the equations, diagrams, geometric shapes that seemed to fold in on themselves in ways that hurt to look at directly. Someone, or something, was working on a problem, a mathematical or physical puzzle that required this entire chamber as scratch paper. And they were close to solving it. I could see the progression, the way the equations built on each other, refining, eliminating, converging towards some solution that was represented by a final diagram on the far wall. It looked like a key. I photographed everything, the tablet struggling to keep up with the complexity. The resonance detector was screaming now, a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. Something was here, right here, working on this. I turned slowly, sweeping my light around the chamber, and saw it. A prior. It was standing in the corner, perfectly still, facing the wall. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and thin in a way that seemed structurally impossible. Its limbs were too long, joints bending at angles that didn't match human anatomy. It was wearing something, not clothes exactly, but a covering that seemed to be made of the same material as the smooth stone, shifting and reforming as I watched. It was holding something, a tool perhaps, pressed against the wall. As I watched, frozen in place, barely breathing, it moved. The motion was fluid but alien, like watching something move underwater. The tool touched the stone, and a new symbol appeared, carved with perfect precision in a fraction of a second. The prior stepped back, tilted its head at an angle no human could achieve, and examined its work. Then it turned, not toward me. It turned further into the corner, as if trying to face away from my presence, but in that moment, I saw its face, or what passed for a face. No eyes that I could recognize, no mouth, just a smooth surface with patterns of ridges that might have been sensory organs or might have been purely decorative. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to back away, to get out of this chamber, to return to the surface and the sun and the normal world where beings had faces and proportions that made sense. But I was transfixed. I was watching something that shouldn't exist, creating something I couldn't understand, with tools and techniques that defied every law of physics I knew. I lifted my tablet, pointed it at the prior, and activated the 3D scanner. The prior froze. The resonance detector's whine cut off abruptly, replaced by silence so profound it felt like physical pressure. Then, slowly, the prior turned toward me. I still don't know if it could see me. Its face had no eyes, but I felt observed, studied, analyzed in a way that was more thorough than vision. It was like being read, every detail of my existence cataloged and evaluated in seconds. Then it moved. Not toward me, thank God. It simply stepped sideways and vanished. Not faded, not fled, just ceased to exist in that location and presumably began existing somewhere else. The tool it had been holding clattered to the floor, suddenly visible now that the prior wasn't there. I stared at the tool for a long moment, my scientific curiosity warring with my survival instinct. It was just lying there, maybe 3 feet from where the prior had stood. Physical evidence of the prior's technology, something that could be studied, analyzed, understood. I took a step toward it. The resonance detector exploded back to life. Not the steady buzz from before, but a cacophony of different frequencies, overlapping, interfering. The tablet screen flickered, showing errors, corrupted data. The lights on my suit began flashing warnings about electromagnetic interference. I grabbed the tool and ran. Back through the narrow passage, scattering my glow stick trail, back to the main corridor, back to the shaft, where I clipped into my ascender and climbed with frantic speed. The tool was in my pack, cold even through the insulated material, heavier than it should have been. I emerged into the natural cave section and found the support team in chaos. Monitors were showing static, Alarms were sounding, and Vaughn was shouting orders into multiple radios. "Rodriguez!" she yelled when she saw me. "What the hell did you do?" Every sensor in the system just went haywire. "We thought—" She stopped when she saw my expression. "You saw one." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "And—" I pulled the tool from my pack and held it out. The support team backed away. One of the suits reached for his radio, speaking in rapid, coded phrases I couldn't follow. Vaughn took the tool from me carefully, holding it like it might explode. It was about a foot long, cylindrical, with no obvious controls or power source. The surface was the same smooth stone as the passages, but it was warm to the touch and seemed to vibrate at a frequency just below what was audible. "You took this? From a prior?" It dropped it. I thought we could learn something. Vaughn looked at the suits. They were having a silent conversation with expressions and minimal gestures. Finally, one of them nodded. "Bag it. Get it to the lab. Full analysis, all protocols, and someone figure out why the sensors went crazy." They took the tool, sealing it in some kind of specialized container. Vaughn turned back to me. "Your camera feed cut out about 20 minutes ago. We got most of the corridor, the equations, but not the prior. Please tell me you got footage before the system crashed." I checked my helmet camera. The last 10 minutes were corrupted, just digital noise. But the tablet had been recording independently. I pulled it out, and despite the damaged interface, I could access the scan data. The 3D model of the prior loaded slowly, rendering in layers. When it finally resolved, everyone in the cave fell silent. The scan had captured everything. The impossible proportions, the alien joints, the tool-covered surface that wasn't quite clothing. But it had captured something else too. Inside the prior, visible through the scanning technology, was a structure. Not organs, not bones, but a geometric pattern, perfectly symmetrical, made of something the software couldn't identify. It pulsed with what looked like light, but the wavelength was outside the normal visible spectrum. "It's a machine," one of the suits whispered. "Not biological, not even organic. It's an artificial construct." "Or," another suit countered, "it's so far beyond biological that our categories don't apply. Look at the complexity. That's not a robot. That's something that evolved, just not the way we did." They argued, but I wasn't listening. I was looking at the data feed from my suit sensors. The temperature readings showed something impossible. In the chamber with the prior, the temperature had dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius, but I hadn't felt cold. My suit wasn't climate-controlled at that level. By all rights, I should have been in hypothermia, possibly dead. But the prior had been warm. I'd felt the heat radiating from it when I'd gotten close. It was like it existed in a different thermal reality, immune to, or perhaps creating the cold around it. "We need to go back," I said, my voice cutting through the argument. "There's more down there, much more. The chamber I saw was just one room. The equations were working towards something, and I think they're close to completion. We need to document all of it before they break through to the surface." Vaughn shook her head. "Not yet. We need to analyze what you've already brought back. Understand what we're dealing with. And Rodriguez, you need rest. You were down there for 16 hours. I checked my watch. She was right. It had felt like 2 hours at most. Time moved differently in the lower development, running slower or faster depending on factors I couldn't identify. They drove me home, a silent government escort in an unmarked sedan. I showered, tried to eat, tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that chamber, those equations, that face that wasn't a face turning toward me with alien awareness. And I thought about the tool, what it could do, how it worked, what it meant that the priors used physical tools at all. They could carve stone with a touch, could vanish at will, could exist in thermal conditions that would kill a human. Why did they need tools? Unless the tool wasn't for carving, unless it was for something else, something we were about to discover. 3 days later, Vaughn called me back to the conference room. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since my descent. "The tool," she said without preamble. "It's not a tool. Or not just a tool, it's a key. Like the diagram you found, but physical, and we think we know what it unlocks." She pulled up the map of the lower development, now updated with my new documentation. The patterns were clearer now, the purpose more obvious. Every passage, every chamber, every structure was part of a single, massive mechanism. "They're not building a structure," Vaughn said. "They're building a door. And Elena, based on the equations you photographed, they're 93% complete. They're going to open it in less than a year." "Open it to what?" She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, feared too much. "We don't know. But, Rodriguez, we need to find out. Because whatever's on the other side, the Pryors have been working for thousands of years to reach it. And that kind of dedication, that kind of focus, suggests whatever they're opening that door to is important enough to justify millennia of effort. Or dangerous enough to require millennia of warning." Vaughn didn't contradict me. "You're going back down," she said. It wasn't a question. Deeper this time. "We need you to find the center of the mechanism, the point where all these passages converge. Because that's where the door is. That's where we'll finally understand what the Pryors are really doing." I thought about the cold, the dark, the alien presence that had studied me with senses I couldn't comprehend. I thought about the equations building toward solution, the key that wasn't just a tool, the door that would open to reveal something humanity wasn't ready for. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow, and Elena, this time you won't be alone. We're sending a team, 3 people, including you. Full documentation, full analysis. Whatever they're building, whatever they're unlocking, we need to know before they complete it." She handed me another folder, this one thinner. Inside were profiles of my team members. Dr. James Chen, archaeologist specializing in pre-Columbian civilizations. Dr. Sarah Martinez, theoretical physicist with expertise in dimensional topology. Both had top-secret clearances and experience with classified government projects. They'll meet you at the gate tomorrow at 0600. Briefing at 0400. Study their files tonight, trust them, and Rodriguez, if anything goes wrong, if the Pryors show hostility, if the structure becomes unstable, you get your team out. The documentation is important, but your lives are more important. I took the files home, read them cover to cover, and tried to prepare mentally for what was coming. But how do you prepare to descend into a structure built by beings that might be older than humanity, that might be from somewhere else, that might be opening a door to somewhere that makes the lower development look mundane? That night, lying in bed, I heard the tapping again. But now I knew what it was. Not construction, not carving. It was a countdown. Every tap marking another step toward completion, another moment closer to whatever waited on the other side of the door. Tap, tap, tap. They were almost done. And tomorrow I would return to the depths and witness the final stages of whatever incomprehensible plan the Pryors had been executing for longer than recorded history. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think anyone involved in the project did. The briefing at 0400 was held in a facility I didn't know existed, 3 miles from the park in an unmarked building that looked like an abandoned warehouse. Inside, it was a high-tech command center that would have impressed NASA. Screens covered every wall, showing seismic data, thermal imaging, and what looked like architectural renderings of the lower development. Dr. James Chen was already there when I arrived, studying a holographic display of the symbol patterns I'd documented. He was in his 50s, thin and intense, with the kind of focus that suggested he'd forgotten to eat or sleep regularly for years. "Ranger Rodriguez," he said, not looking away from the display. "These symbols, you said they've changed in the last 6 months?" "Yes. More organized, more deliberate. Because they're teaching us," he said, finally making eye contact, "or preparing us. Look at the progression." He manipulated the hologram, showing symbols from different time periods. 1924, completely alien. 1967, still incomprehensible, but with mathematical undertones. Your documentation from 6 months ago, partially recognizable as advanced topology. And your recent scans, these equations use conventions that we invented in the last 50 years. They're adapting their communication method to match our current understanding. Why? "That's what terrifies me," Dr. Sarah Martinez said, entering with 2 cups of coffee and looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Because it means they're aware of our technological progression. They're monitoring us, studying our scientific development, and adjusting their work accordingly. The question is whether they're trying to help us understand, or just making sure we know enough to be useful." She handed me one of the coffees and studied me with sharp, analytical eyes. "You've seen them?" "The priors. What was your impression?" I thought about the being in the corner, its impossible anatomy, the way it had turned away from me at first, then toward me with that sense of profound observation. "Indifferent," I said. "Like we're beneath their notice. Or maybe so different they can't quite conceptualize us as intelligent. Like we're insects that happen to build cities. Except insects that build cities would be fascinating," Chen said. "Worth studying, worth communicating with. But they don't communicate, they just work. For centuries we've observed them, and they've never once tried to make contact. They avoid us, retreat from us, and then go back to their construction as if we never existed." Vaughn entered with the suits, all business. "Final briefing. You'll have 72 hours in the lower development. That's the maximum we can safely support. You'll be carrying enough supplies for 4 days in case of emergency, but plan on 3. Your mission is to reach the central chamber and document whatever's there. The convergence point of all the passages." She pulled up a new map, this one showing our route. It would take us deeper than anyone had gone, through passages that had only been detected by sonar and seismic mapping. "You'll encounter priors," one of the suits said. "Based on Rodriguez's experience, they're not hostile, but they're also unpredictable. If one approaches you, do not touch it. Do not interfere with their work. Document from a distance and move on." "What about the tool?" I asked. "The one I brought back." "What did the analysis show?" The suits exchanged glances. Finally, Vaughn answered. "It's not made of any material we can identify. It exists at multiple temperatures simultaneously. It emits radiation and spectra we didn't know existed. And when we tried to activate it, it vanished from the containment chamber and reappeared in the lower development. We watched it happen on thermal imaging. One moment it was in the lab, the next it was back in the exact spot you took it from. So the priors can retrieve their tools, or the tools return themselves. We're not sure which is more disturbing. At 0600, we assembled at the gate to H-47. Full gear, enough equipment to outfit a small expedition. Chen had specialized archaeological documentation tools. Martinez had sensors I couldn't identify, designed to detect and measure things I didn't understand. I had my enhanced helmet camera, my scanning tablet, and 15 years of cave expertise. The descent was smoother with 3 people. We moved methodically, documenting everything, taking our time. Chen photographed every symbol, cross-referencing with his database of ancient languages and mathematical notation. Martinez took constant readings with her sensors, muttering about dimensional variance and quantum flux in ways that suggested she was detecting things that shouldn't be detectable. The corridor looked exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago. Same smooth walls, same precise angles, same symbols. But something felt different, more active somehow. The air itself seemed to vibrate at a frequency just below hearing. "You feel that?" Martinez asked. "The resonance?" "It's stronger than it should be. Something's changed." We reached the shaft and descended in stages at Shesa. At Shesa, the bottom, Chen immediately began documenting the spiral patterns carved into the walls, comparing them to fractals and mathematical spirals found in nature. "This isn't decorative," he said, excitement creeping into his voice. "This is functional. Look at the spacing, the depth variation. It's a guide, or a map, or maybe instructions. Each spiral corresponds to one of the branching passages below." We followed the main corridor to the first branch point. This time, instead of going right like I had before, we went left, following the route mapped out by sonar. This passage was wider, taller, more processional. The walls were covered in larger symbols, carved deeper, arranged in patterns that suggested importance. "It's a timeline," Chen said, stopping to study a sequence of symbols, "or a history. Look, these early symbols are simpler, more primitive. As you move forward, they become more complex, more refined. It's showing evolution, or progress, or development over vast periods." "How long?" I asked. He did some quick calculations on his tablet. "If each symbol represents a significant iteration or development period, and assuming any reasonable time scale, millions of years. Elena, these beings have been working on this project for longer than humanity has existed." We continued deeper. The passage began to descend more steeply, and the temperature dropped even further. My suit was rated for extreme cold, but I could still feel it, a penetrating chill that seemed to come from the stone itself. Martinez stopped suddenly, checking her sensors. "We have a problem. The dimensional variance just spiked. I'm reading overlapping spatial coordinates. According to this, we're in 2 places at once." "What does that mean?" "I'm not sure. But if the priors are working with technology that can manipulate space-time, we might be entering a region where normal physics don't fully apply. Everyone, stay close. If the spatial geometry becomes unstable, we could get separated even though we're walking single file." As if to emphasize her point, I noticed something strange about the walls. They seemed to shimmer, not quite solid, as if I was seeing them through heat haze, except it was freezing. When I reached out to touch the surface, my hand passed through the first inch before meeting resistance. "Don't," Martinez said sharply. "You're touching a region of intersecting space. Pull back slowly." I withdrew my hand. It felt fine, looked normal, but for a moment, I could have sworn I'd seen it from 2 angles simultaneously, as if my eyes were in different positions. The passage opened into a chamber that made the equation room look small. It was vast, easily 200 feet across, with a ceiling that soared up beyond the reach of our lights. And every surface was covered in structures. They rose from the floor in geometric patterns, some cylindrical, some pyramidal, some shapes I couldn't name because they hurt to look at directly. They were all made of the same smooth stone, but they varied in size from knee-high to taller than buildings. And between them, carved into every available surface, were symbols. Millions of them, overlapping, interconnecting, creating patterns so complex that my brain couldn't process the whole image at once. "My God," Chen whispered. "This is a library." "Or an archive. Every structure, every symbol, it's all information, knowledge stored in physical form." Martinez was frantically taking readings. "The resonance here is off the charts. Whatever they're building, this chamber is central to it. I'm detecting energy signatures I've never seen before. Elena, we need to document everything, but we need to be fast. I don't think this space is stable." We split up, each taking a section of the chamber. I documented structures, scanning their geometry, photographing the symbols carved into them. Some of the structures had what looked like controls, raised sections that might have been buttons or interfaces. Others were sealed, smooth, offering no obvious way to access whatever information they contained. That's when I saw movement. Not a prior. Something else. The structures themselves were moving, slowly, incrementally. The cylindrical ones were rotating, maybe a degree every few seconds. The pyramidal ones were shifting, their tips pointing in different directions. The whole chamber was a machine, and it was active. "Chen, Martinez," I called. "The structures are moving." They saw it too. We stood there watching the slow, deliberate motion, and I realized what we were seeing. This wasn't storage. This was computation. Each structure was a component in some vast calculating machine, processing information, working through problems that required this entire massive chamber to solve. "It's a computer," Martinez said, wonder in her voice. "An analog computer built into the cave system itself, and it's been running for, Elena, some of these structures are showing signs of millions of years of wear. This machine has been calculating something since before humans existed." "Calculating what?" Chen asked. As if in answer, one of the larger structures suddenly stopped rotating. There was a sound, like stone grinding against stone, and a section of it opened. Inside was a hollow space, and within that space, something glowed with soft blue light. A prior emerged from the structure. Not walked out, not climbed out. It simply appeared in the opening, as if it had been compressed into that small space and was now expanding back to its full size. It was carrying something, a crystalline object that pulsed with the same blue light. We froze. The prior stood motionless for a moment, then began moving toward the center of the chamber. Its gait was that same alien, fluid motion I'd seen before, like watching something move through water. It didn't acknowledge our presence, didn't deviate from its path. 2 more priors emerged from other structures. Then 5 more, then 10. Within minutes, 20 of them were moving through the chamber, all heading toward the center, all carrying crystalline objects that glowed with various colors. "We need to follow them," Chen whispered. "This is it. This is what we came to see." We moved carefully, keeping our distance, staying behind the priors as they converged on the center of the chamber. There, rising from the floor, was a structure I hadn't noticed before. It was massive, maybe 30 feet tall, and it was different from the others. Not smooth stone, but something that looked almost organic, like it had been grown rather than carved. The priors began placing their crystalline objects into openings in the structure. Each crystal seemed to find its own specific slot, fitting perfectly, and when placed, it began to glow brighter. The structure itself started to hum, a sound that was felt more than heard, vibrating through the stone and into my bones. "They're feeding it," Martinez said, her sensors going crazy. "Energy, information, something. Each crystal is a data package or a power source or both. Elena, that central structure. It's reading as multiple objects occupying the same space. I think it's the door, or the key to the door, or both simultaneously." The last prior placed its crystal, and the humming intensified. The structure began to change. its surface flowing like liquid, reforming, creating patterns that were beautiful and terrible. Through openings that appeared and disappeared, I could see light, but it wasn't coming from any source I could identify. It was just there, existing in spaces that shouldn't contain anything. Then the priors stopped moving, all of them simultaneously. They stood in a circle around the structure, perfectly still, perfectly synchronized. And they began to sing. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was vibration, resonance, something that existed in multiple sensory domains at once. I could hear it, feel it, almost see it as ripples in the air, and it had structure, harmony, complexity that suggested meaning. Chen was recording everything, his hands shaking. Martinez was crying, though she probably didn't realize it, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the impossible scene before us. The song built in intensity, and the central structure responded. It began to open, not like a door swinging on hinges, but like reality itself was peeling back, revealing something that existed behind or beneath or within normal space. The light grew brighter, and I could see shapes moving in it, vast and terrible and beautiful, things that my brain couldn't process into coherent form. And then I understood. The priors weren't opening a door to let something in. They were opening a door to let something out, to release something that had been trapped or sealed or contained for longer than human civilization had existed. And whatever it was aware. I could feel its attention, vast and alien and utterly indifferent to human concerns, pressing against the boundary between its reality and ours. The song reached a crescendo, and the structure fully opened. The light became blinding, and I had to look away. When I could see again, the priors were gone. Not fled, not hidden, just gone, like they'd never been there. But something else was there. In the space where the structure had been, floating a few feet off the ground, was a sphere. It was maybe 6 feet in diameter, perfectly smooth, and it seemed to contain an entire universe. I could see stars within it, galaxies, cosmic structures that existed on scales I couldn't comprehend. It was like looking at the entire cosmos compressed into a single point. "What is it?" Chen asked, his voice barely a whisper. Martinez checked her sensors and made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "According to this, it's everything, or nothing, or both. The readings don't make sense. It's registering as having infinite mass and zero mass simultaneously. It's here and not here. It's real and it's not real." "We need to report this," I said, reaching for my radio. But the radio was dead. So was every piece of electronic equipment we carried. The helmet cameras, the tablets, the sensors, all of it fried by whatever energy the sphere was emitting. "We need to get out of here," Martinez said, backing away from the sphere. "Now. Whatever that thing is, it's not stable. Or it's too stable. I'm not sure which, but either way, we shouldn't be near it." As if responding to her words, the sphere began to sink. Slowly, gracefully, it descended into the floor, passing through solid stone like it was water. The chamber shook, a deep rumble that sent dust and small rocks falling from the ceiling. "Run," Chen said. We ran. Back through the vast chamber, dodging the slowly moving structures. Back to the passage, where the walls were no longer shimming but cracking, spiderweb fractures spreading through the smooth stone. Back to the main corridor where the symbols were glowing with a light that came from within the stone itself. The prior construction was collapsing, or transforming, or both. Everything we'd seen, all the carefully carved passages and precise angles, all of it was changing, reforming, becoming something new. The tapping sound was everywhere now, deafening. Thousands of points of impact as the priors worked at speeds they'd never shown before, racing to complete something before a deadline we couldn't perceive. We made it to the shaft and climbed with desperate speed. The smooth walls of the shaft were developing those cracks too, and I could see light bleeding through them, that same impossible light from the sphere. At the top, we ran through the sealed passage, past the gate that was now hanging open, torn from its hinges from the inside. The support team was in chaos, equipment sparking and failing, alarms screaming. Vaughn grabbed me as we emerged into the natural cave section. "What did you do? What happened down there?" "They opened it," I gasped. "The door." "They opened it and something came through. Or was released, I don't know. But Director, the whole lower development is changing. They're not building anymore, they're completing." Behind us, from the depths, came a sound that I'd never forget. Not the tapping, not the humming, but a voice, if you could call it that. A presence expressing itself in sound, speaking in frequencies that existed outside normal human hearing but that I could feel in every cell of my body. And what it said, though I couldn't explain how I understood, was simple: ready. The earth shook. Not a tremor, not a quake, but a fundamental shift, as if the ground itself was rearranging its relationship with gravity and space. Alarms throughout the cave system began sounding, automated warnings about instability and evacuation. "Everyone out," Vaughn ordered. "Now, full evacuation of the cave system." We ran. Staff, tourists, everyone, flooding toward the exits as the cave system groaned and shifted around us. Above ground, the park erupted into controlled chaos. Emergency protocols activated. Seismographs went haywire. And deep below, beneath hundreds of feet of limestone, the priors completed their work. I stood in the parking lot, along with hundreds of others, watching the ground, waiting for whatever was coming next, waiting for the door to finish opening, for the sphere to emerge, for the prior's incomprehensible plan to reach its conclusion. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and red. It might have been beautiful if I hadn't known what was happening beneath my feet. Vaughn stood beside me, phone pressed to her ear, speaking to people I'd never meet about protocols I'd never know. When she hung up, she looked at me with eyes that had accepted the impossible. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you three are the only people who've seen it. The only ones who know what's really down there. We need you to document everything you remember, every detail, while it's still fresh." "How long?" I asked. "Until it reaches the surface." She checked a readout that one of the suits was showing her. "Based on current seismic activity, 18 hours, maybe less. And then? Then we find out what the priors have been building for millions of years. We find out why they needed that sphere, that door, that impossible machine. We find out what ready means." She paused, watching the sun touch the horizon. "And God help us all if it's something we should have stopped, but I knew we couldn't have stopped it. Humanity had been spectators in this, nothing more. The priors had worked for eons, following a plan so vast and complex that we'd only glimpsed the smallest fraction of it. And now their work was done. The door was open. Something was ready. And in 18 hours, give or take, the surface of Kentucky would crack open, and whatever the priors had been protecting or imprisoning or preparing would emerge into a world that had no idea it was coming. I looked at Chen and Martinez. They looked back at me. We'd gone into the depths seeking knowledge, seeking understanding, and we'd found it. But that knowledge came with a price, and now we had to live with knowing what was beneath our feet, what was coming, what could never be stopped. The tapping had stopped, the work was done. All that remained was the waiting, and they waited. "What are they doing?" Chen whispered. Martinez was frantically working on a tablet she'd managed to get partially functional. I'm picking up a signal. No, multiple signals. Coming from above, from orbit, from... Oh my God. They're not alone. There are more of them up there. She turned the tablet to show us. On the screen, rendered in low resolution from satellite data she'd somehow accessed, were objects. Dozens of them, orbiting Earth, too regular to be natural, too precise to be human-made. How long? Vaughn asked. We should have spotted them before, but their orbits are irregular, designed to avoid our satellite networks. Based on their current trajectory, they've been there for... I can't even calculate this. The orbital decay suggests they've been in space for hundreds of thousands of years at minimum. They've been waiting, I said. All this time, the priors down here have been preparing something, and their counterparts up there have been waiting for the signal, for ready. As if confirming my words, the objects in orbit began to move. On Martinez's tablet, we watched as they descended, entering atmosphere, not burning up, but glowing with that same blue-white light. They were coming down all over the world, I realized. Not just Kentucky, not just America. Everywhere. The priors at the base of the structure began their song again, that resonant vibration that existed in multiple sensory dimensions. And from the sky, descending on pillars of light that defied physics, came the answer. Ships, or structures, or beings. It was impossible to tell where one category ended and another began. They looked organic and mechanical, ancient and futuristic, real and impossible all at once. The nearest one landed 100 yards from the structure, settling onto the ground with no impact, no sound, just suddenly being there where a moment before there had been empty air. A section of it opened, and more priors emerged. These were different somehow, more refined, or perhaps more evolved. They moved with even greater fluidity, and they carried themselves with something that read as authority or wisdom, or age beyond measuring. One of them approached our group. Every weapon in the perimeter came up. Every soldier tensed, but the prior didn't seem to notice or care. It stopped 10 feet from us and did something that made my heart skip. It knelt, not in submission, not in supplication, but in greeting, or perhaps in respect. Its alien head bowed, its 2 long limbs folded in a pose that somehow conveyed reverence despite the utterly foreign anatomy. Then it spoke, not in English, not in any human language, but directly into our minds. I don't know how else to describe it. The meaning simply appeared in my consciousness, translated from whatever method of communication it used into concepts I could understand. Witness. You are selected to witness. The burden is heavy, but necessary. Your species must know. Know what? Vaughn asked, her voice steady despite the impossibility of the situation. The prior gestured toward the structure, toward the priors gathered there, toward the ships descending from orbit all around the world. Know that you are not alone. Have never been alone. We have watched since your species learned to speak, watched and protected and prepared you. For this, the moment of emergence, the time of readiness. Chen stepped forward, scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. What are you? Where do you come from? We are gardeners. We have tended this world for 3 million of your years. We seeded the oceans when they were barren. We guided evolution when it faltered. We protected life when extinction threatened. We have been here beneath, watching your species grow from primitive primates to builders of cities, thinkers of thoughts, makers of meaning. Why? Martinez asked. Why do any of this? What do you want from us? The prior's head tilted, that alien gesture that might have been the equivalent of a smile. Want nothing. Give everything. This world was chosen 3 million years ago to be a garden, a sanctuary, a place where intelligence could evolve, protected from the darkness between stars. Our purpose is completion. Your species is ready. Time to know truth. It gestured again, and the structure behind it began to change. The symbols on its surface rearranged themselves, forming new patterns, new meanings, and somehow I could read them, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. The knowledge just appeared in my mind, complete and comprehensive. The priors weren't native to Earth. They were ancient, older than most stars in the galaxy. They were explorers, scientists, gardeners on a cosmic scale. They found worlds capable of supporting life and helped, guided evolution along beneficial paths, protected biospheres from cosmic disasters, and when a species reached a certain level of development, a threshold of readiness, they revealed themselves. Earth was one of thousands of gardens they tended, but it was special because humanity had developed faster, more creatively, more chaotically than most species they'd nurtured. We'd gone from stone tools to space travel in what was, to them, the blink of an eye. And now we were ready. Not ready for conquest, not ready for galactic empire. Ready for truth. Ready to know we were part of something larger, something ancient, something that had been preparing for this moment since before human ancestors came down from the trees. The door we opened, the prior continued, is not a door to elsewhere. It is a door to now, to this moment. We have been preparing you, teaching you through symbols and patterns, showing you mathematics and physics beyond your current understanding, all leading here, to choice. What choice? I asked. Join or remain? Know or forget, your species stands at threshold. Behind is ignorance, comfortable and familiar. Ahead is knowledge, burden, and gift together. We show you what we have built. You decide if humanity accepts. The structure's doorway expanded, and through it, I could see something that made the sphere in the underground chamber look small. It was a view, or a window, or an actual portal to somewhere else. I could see other worlds, thousands of them, each teeming with life. Some familiar, jungles and oceans and mountains. Others completely alien, landscapes of crystal and energy, geometries that shouldn't exist, life forms that defied every category of biology I'd ever learned. This is Garden Network, the prior explained. 10,000 worlds, all tended, all protected, all brought to readiness. Earth is newest. Last to join, or first to refuse. Choice is yours. Vaughn found her voice. What does joining mean? What changes? Everything and nothing. Your species continues as before, but knowledge opens. Technology shares. Questions answer. Loneliness ends. You learn you are not alone, not unique, but part of something vast and old and purposeful. You learn your place in cosmos is not insignificant, is special, is necessary. And if we refuse, we depart. Seal lower development. Erase memories of those who witnessed. Your species continues in ignorance, believing itself alone, until you reach readiness again through your own effort. 3,000 years we estimate, perhaps 4. Then we return, offer again. Choice always remains. We force nothing. The weight of what it was saying crashed down on me. This wasn't first contact with aliens. This was the revelation that first contact had happened millions of years ago, that we'd been nurtured, protected, guided by gardeners who'd been working in secret since before humanity existed, that every step of our evolution had been shepherded by beings who saw our potential and carefully, patiently helped us achieve it. How do we choose? Chen asked. How does humanity decide something like this? Already choosing, the prior said. This moment, broadcast globally. Every mind capable of witnessing witnesses. We wait. Consensus emerges. Species knows its own readiness. Humans will decide collectively, unconsciously, naturally. As all species do, time required, unknown. But we are patient. Have been patient for 3 million years. Can be patient 3 million more if necessary. And I realized it was true. I could feel it, a strange sensation at the edge of my consciousness. Not telepathy, not mind control, but a connection. To Chen, to Martinez, to Vaughn, to the soldiers in the perimeter, to the people watching on television screens around the world. Humanity was having a conversation with itself, wordless, instinctive, deciding its own future in the span of moments. I don't know how long we stood there. Time seemed flexible, negotiable, as if the prior's presence somehow made minutes stretch or compress according to need. But eventually, the sensation crystallized into clarity. Humanity had chosen. The prior stood, that gesture of respect again. Choice made. Answer received. Humanity accepts knowledge, burden and gift together. Process begins now. Integration complete in 1 generation. Your children will grow knowing truth. Your children's children will walk between stars as we do. Garden Network welcomes Earth. The structure behind it began to change. No longer just stone, but something more. Windows opened in its surface, showing views of other worlds. Lights appeared, not for illumination, but for beauty, patterns that spoke of celebration. And from the ships still descending around the world, more priors emerged, carrying tools and gifts and knowledge accumulated over eons. You witness beginning, the prior said. You 3 chosen specifically for this role. Ranger who found the door. Scientist who read the symbols. Physicist who understood the geometry. You become translators. Bridges between species. Burden is heavy, but gift is vast. Do you accept? I looked at Chen. He was crying, openly, tears streaming down his face as he nodded. Martinez was smiling, the kind of smile that came from understanding something so profound that words became unnecessary. I thought about my 15 years as a ranger, protecting and preserving Yosemite, and I realized I'd been training for this my whole life, protecting Earth, serving as a bridge between humanity and something wilder, older, beyond our complete understanding. Yes, I said, we accept. The prior reached out with one too long limb and touched my forehead. I felt something change. Not painfully, but profoundly. Knowledge flowing into me. Not facts or figures, but understanding. How to read the symbols. How to communicate with priors. How to explain to others what this all meant. It touched Chen and Martinez as well. We stood there, the 3 of us forever changed. Forever marked by this moment. Process begins, the prior said. Questions you have, time will answer. Fear you feel, understanding will ease. Loneliness that defined your species ends today. Welcome to garden. Welcome to truth. Welcome home. The structure began to sink, not disappearing but settling into the ground, becoming a permanent fixture of the landscape, a monument, a reminder, a doorway for those who needed to know that humanity was no longer alone. The priors dispersed, some returning to their ships, others walking into the surrounding forest, beginning whatever work they'd come to do. The perimeter relaxed, soldiers lowering weapons, scientists rushing forward with instruments and questions and wonder. But I just stood there, looking up at the sky, knowing that beyond it were 10,000 worlds, 10,000 gardens, 10,000 species that had been nurtured and protected and brought to readiness just like us. We weren't alone. We had never been alone, and the priors, the ancient gardeners, had been beneath our feet all along, patiently carving and building and preparing for the day when humanity would be ready to join the garden network. That day had come. Vaughn approached me, her expression complex. "Rodriguez, what do we do now?" I smiled, feeling the weight of knowledge the prior had given me, the burden and the gift together. Now we learn. We grow. We help others understand. The priors have been preparing Earth for 3 million years. I think we can take the time to prepare humanity for what comes next. And what does come next? I looked at the structure, now perfectly integrated into the landscape, as if it had always been there. I looked at the ships on the horizon, each one a library of knowledge older than human civilization. I looked at my hands, still shaking slightly, and knew they would never touch stone again without remembering what lived beneath it. "Everything," I said. "Everything comes next." Chen joined us, his tablet somehow functioning again, displaying images from around the world. Structures emerging from Earth, from oceans, from beneath ice caps. Priors revealing themselves on every continent, beginning their work of integration, of teaching, of showing humanity its place in the cosmic garden. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Terrifying and beautiful, and completely overwhelming. But beautiful." Martinez was already talking to a group of physicists, explaining the geometry she'd detected, the dimensional variance, the technology that seemed like magic but was really just science so advanced it appeared supernatural. She was in her element, translating between human understanding and prior knowledge, already fulfilling the role she'd accepted. I thought about the tapping, that sound that had haunted me for months, that had marked each step toward this moment. It had stopped because the work was complete. The door was open, the signal sent, the garden revealed. But in its absence I heard something else. Not sound, but presence. The awareness of 10,000 worlds, all connected, all part of the network. And Earth's voice, young and loud and chaotic, joining that chorus. We were not alone. We would never be alone again. And somewhere beneath Mammoth Cave, in passages that predated humanity, in chambers carved by patient hands over millions of years, the priors continued their work. Not building anymore, but maintaining, preserving, protecting the garden that Earth had always been. I am Ranger Elena Rodriguez. I spent 15 years thinking I was protecting a cave system in Kentucky, but I was wrong. The cave was protecting us, hiding the gardeners, keeping their secret until we were ready to know. Now I know. Now humanity knows. And that knowledge changes everything. The below-ground boundary wasn't a border to keep us out. It was a threshold to cross when we were ready. And on the other side, waiting with patience measured in eons, were beings who had nurtured us, guided us, and loved us in their own incomprehensible way since before we learned to speak. The garden is vast. The network is ancient. And humanity's place in both has just begun.